Gerçekten müthiş. Tamam değil mi? Okay.
Ekran gidince hocam.
Efendim? Ha, ekran gidince, okay.
Şu anda şimdi.
Yes, you're live. Go ahead.
I am? Okay. Now I'm live. It's gone. Great. Welcome, everyone, to the 5th session of our conference on AI, philosophy, and human will. I'm very excited to welcome our guests. They are colleagues, friends, and new friends whom I'm looking forward to working with in the near future, inshallah. Our first presenter is Enis Doko. He received his Bachelor of Science in Physics and BA in Philosophy at Middle East Technical University. He has a doctoral degree in Theoretical Physics from Koç University. His areas of research and interest are philosophy of science, philosophy of religion, analytical metaphysics, philosophy of mathematics, ultra-cold atomic physics, many-body physics. And he's very popular online. He's got YouTube videos and very popular with students. He's very well known for sort of explaining science to the masses, as it were. So we're very, very glad to have him here. Just to note, the presentations are going to be 25 minutes each, and we will take the questions at the end, inshallah. So, Enis Hocam, please.
Well, thank you very much. So, sorry, the wrong presentation. You see AI is playing with me too, just when I thought that I have it in control. So, okay. So the question I'm going to try to address, or at least I'm going to comment, is the greatest question in the field of philosophy of artificial intelligence, that is whether robots can think. So actually we call it whether robots can have a mental state rather than saying they think. And I'm now going to explain what I mean by having mental states. But let's start with quick definition of what is artificial intelligence. So there are two distinct understandings of artificial intelligence, as you can see from the Merriam-Webster definition of it. A branch of computer science dealing with the simulation of intelligent behavior in computers. That's usually what we call AI in everyday sense. And number two, the capacity of machine to imitate intelligent human behavior. And this is what we call robots. Robots, unlike traditional AI, they have also bodies. So not only they have capacity to simulate intelligent behavior, but also they have body to express it. So basically the question I'm going to try to answer is whether such a beings which have body can have mental states. And there is a useful distinction we make. So there are different types of AI. First, you can differentiate between local AI and global AI. Local AI is a single task AI, like chess playing computer program is a local AI. It can simulate intelligent behavior, but just for playing chess, nothing else. Global AI would be a machine or program which can do multiple tasks at the same time. It would be like human, similar to humans, can play chess, can solve mathematical problems, can listen and understand the news. So global AI is what we are searching for. Then we have another important distinction. We can talk about weak AI, which would be a multitask AI without subjective mental states. I will define what mental states are, but this would be a robot which behaves intelligently from the outside, but the inner world is dark. It doesn't understand what he's doing. He doesn't feel the emotions. On the other hand, the more interesting AI is the so-called strong AI, which is a multitasking artificial intelligence with subjective mental states. And the question actually, which we philosophers are interested in, is whether strong AI is possible. So let me briefly define what we mean by subjective mental states, there are at least three important distinctive mental states which are important in the debate. The first and maybe the most important one is qualia. It is individual instances of subjective conscious experiences. It is the sensation of pain, the sensation of taste, perception of color, experience of love, everything which we experience in our inner world, our feelings, basically corresponds to qualia. Why qualia is important? Well, we assume that we have moral responsibility towards beings which have qualia. Why it is wrong to torture a cat? Well, traditionally we think this is wrong because cats experience pain, and it is therefore bad to torture a cat. While on the other hand, I can torture my mobile phone. Maybe you say you are crazy, but no one will blame me like being immoral person. So this question is very important. If we are going to have a robots, whether we will have a moral responsibility towards them, whether we can enslave them, it is the question whether they will have a qualia. And actually, industry will want to get rid of qualia. If you want to have a home robot, you would want to have robots without qualia. The second mental state is intentionality. It is the power of the minds to be about something, to represent something. Basically, it is the semantic content of our minds. It is how our minds grasp the concepts. And basically, intentionality, we cannot call it understanding. We understand via intentionality. While I can memorize a sentence, unless I know its semantic content, unless I know its meaning, I wouldn't be able to understand that sentence. And usually the computer programs we use today, they manipulate symbols so they can communicate with us, but they don't understand what they communicate. Program can tell us that he likes us, but he doesn't understand what he's talking about. He's just manipulating the symbols. So the second mental state, which is important, is intentionality. And the third one, which is again very, very important, is the free will. This is the ability of mind to choose between different possible courses of action. And this is important for the judgment of person or persons. So why we held people responsible? We believe that people, humans, have free will. That's why they should be accounted for their actions. So beings which have free will have responsibility. While if you have qualia, the actions towards you carry responsibility. If you have free will, your own actions as well carry responsibility. So similarly, when we talk about whether robots have free will, it's an important question in legal terms, because if robots have a free will, then he will be subject to punishment. He will be questioned for its actions. On the other hand, if robots don't have a free will, they are not legal objects. Either the country or the company or the engineer, it's debatable who should be responsible, but definitely the machine itself will not be responsible. So we have at least three different subjective mental states, and each of them are worth to be questioned whether robots can have them. Of course, it's impossible to talk about all these different possibilities in one talk. I will take two arguments, one in support of the most famous ones, that robots can have a qualia, and I will take one argument against the robots having mental states, which aim to show that robots cannot have intentionality. So without losing time, let me move to the first argument against AI. The first argument I want to talk about is the most famous argument leveled against artificial intelligence. It's the so-called Chinese room argument of John Searle. So John Searle aims to show that robots cannot have intentionality. Perhaps they may have qualia, but they may not have understanding. They may experience perhaps pain, but they wouldn't understand it. They wouldn't be in understanding of what they are experiencing. So the basic argument is this. John Searle invites us to imagine a room in which there is a person, like in the picture, it's actually John Searle, standing, and he has a rule book in which we have similar pages like this. It is written, if you see this page, then produce this shape. So if you see this shape, write as an answer this shape. So the person inside doesn't speak Chinese, but has the ability to answer Chinese questions with the help of a rule book. He looks at the rule book, finds out the suitable answer for the question, and gives the corresponding answer outside. And there are Chinese people, real Chinese people outside of the room, and they ask different questions to the room. They ask their questions either with some screen like this, there's an input, and then outside an answer comes. Whatever question they ask, they find that there is a reasonable answer. So they conclude that whoever is inside the room or the room itself speaks Chinese. But John Searle says, think about it. I'm as a person standing inside, I'm answering the questions, but do I really speak Chinese? Do I really understand Chinese? It seems not. So since I don't understand Chinese, and since the room obviously cannot understand the Chinese, it means that showing behavior as you are understanding is not equivalent to really understand Chinese. And he says this is what computers are doing. They take input with ones and zeros, and they give a corresponding output based on their algorithm. So as a result, they don't really understand. They lack understanding, so they lack intentionality. At least one mental state will be always absent in computers. There are many replies to this argument, but I want to give my favorite reply. That's this argument misrepresents the current state of AI. So while it is true that Chinese room does not understand English, a complicated robot will not look like a Chinese room. A complicated robot will be similar to human brain. It will have a connectionist system. It will have a system in which there are a lot of connections, and it will simulate exactly the human brain. And actually, there is one other important distinction between this Chinese room and a robot. That robot has a body, while the Chinese room doesn't have a body. So robot can interact with its environment, can interact with the objects, and this interaction may be a cause of creation of meaning. There are some people who think that meaning is created through interaction with the environment. But it's a long discussion, maybe in the QA we can discuss this, but at least we don't really know whether this thought experiment works for connectionist systems. So actually, here the Churchlands, the wife and they are a pair of philosophers, wife and his husband. They think that there is a clearly even scientific misunderstanding here. If you look at the human brain, if you look at its behavior, you will say that certainly this gray matter cannot have an understanding. So by just looking with your intuitions, you can't really know whether the brain is thinking or not. They give an example. In old time, people, when the first talked about light being an electromagnetic wave, so light we see is actually an electromagnetic wave. If you take some magnet or charged particle, if you move it really fast, it will create a light. And this is actually how light is created. But when people first were introduced this idea, they thought that it's crazy. Just take a magnet. I'm playing with the magnet. It is not creating light, you see? So light cannot be created artificially, they said. What was the mistake? Well, they didn't understand the basics of physics. You need to move very fast the magnet to create visible light, which cannot be done with human hand. Here, Chinese room misrepresents the real research in artificial intelligence. The real research in artificial intelligence has actually currently moved to connectionist systems, systems which imitate the human brain rather than manipulating the symbols. Of course, the question is, can such systems have a mental state? It seems John Searle doesn't give us any reason to think that such a systems cannot have a mental state. We will return to this question, but we see what this argument really lacks is a proper insertion of science into it. Let's look at other side of the question. That is, an argument which claims that robots can have a mental state. The most famous argument in support of mental states is David Chalmers' argument of fading qualia. So this is the guy, David Chalmers. He's like a rock star in Australia, and he really plays music, as you can see from his style. So he has an interesting thought experiment. So he says, imagine that I take a human, a real human, and I open the brain of the human. Currently, we have developed artificial neurons. Actually, neurons can be replaced with artificial ones. For 2 years, we have such neurons, but this is a thought experiment. So we opened up the brain. What we see is this. There are different neurons, each communicating with each other with electric signals. And this is how they control my body. Electric signals come from the brain to my muscles, and my muscle is moving. And oppositely, we receive information from the outside world through electric signals. So he invites us to change slowly the neurons in our brain with chips, artificially made neurons. Their behavior is exactly same with biological neurons. So biological neurons will receive an electric signal, will give out. Artificial neurons does the same thing. When he receives the same electric signal, gives outside the same electric signal. So if we replace one by one the neurons in my brain will not understand it, will not be aware that some of them are electronic, because what happens will be the same communication. The other neurons will not know that there are some artificial neurons. So here is the thought experiment. Suppose I opened up the brain of one person and I started to change one by one the neurons in the brain. What will happen to the qualia of this person? So that's the question. Suppose I look at something red in the screen, and I'm listening to music, Mozart, and I'm talking about the music, I'm talking about the color. And slowly, while I'm doing this, my neurons are changed one by one with artificial ones. There are three possible scenarios according to David Chalmers. Number one is what he calls a fading qualia. Fading qualia is this. Slowly, the mental image will start to disappear, slowly. So it is like in this picture. While I see red, slowly the redness will fade away. That's why we call it fading qualia. So the sound I'm listening, the Mozart sound, will slowly start to get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. And eventually, when most of my brain cells are changed with artificial neurons, I will lose completely my qualia. And this will not be visible from the outside world, because the same electric signals will move around my body. I will still hold my hand. I will talk in a similar way. But my inner world, my mental states will disappear. Chalmers thinks this is impossible. Why? Well, he thinks it is very strange. While you will still say that I'm listening to Mozart, your inner voice will not be listening it completely. Actually, your inner voice will say, no, I'm not able to listen it, but I will not be able to express this feeling. I will still continue to talk like everything is normal. It's like my body is being possessed. It will continue to act in the same way because the electric signals are moving in the same way, but I will not, my inner voice will not be able to respond, will listen to the music, will not be able to distinguish whether it is Mozart or not. But when asked whether it is Mozart, I'm saying it is Mozart. When asked about the color, I'm saying it is red. While my color perception is so blurred, I cannot really understand whether it is red or not. Chalmers thinks this is absurd. This cannot happen. So he says fading qualia is illogical. Then we have another possibility. The qualia is not fading, it is remaining constant, but there is a critical moment at which when you take out the neuron, everything goes black. If you put it back, everything returns back to colorful world. I listen to music, I see the colors. Everything depends on one critical neuron. It goes constantly, the qualia suddenly drops down. Chalmers thinks this is absurd too. First, he thinks that there is no such abrupt changes in nature. He says, no, you cannot see this in nature. Everything should be moving slowly. Second, he thinks this is absurd when we think about what it means. So if this is true, and I hope this is true, you can put a switch in your brain. Half of your brain is like artificial and half is biological, and there is one critical neuron. You can turn it off or turn it on whenever you want with the switch. When you turn it on, your mental states will come back. When you turn it off, they will go out. But your behavior will remain same. So suppose you are in pain, you will turn off your mental states and you will continue to live without experiencing the pain. Or suppose your wife is constantly talking, you don't want to listen to her anymore, you just close your mental states. While you act like you are listening, you are telling her the answers she wants. Your brain is completely dark. So is this possible? Chalmers thinks it is simply absurd to imagine such a scenario with just flipping one neuron, turning on and off the mental states. He thinks it is impossible. But if this scenario is impossible, what is left is the third scenario. That is, when I finish completely the process, all my brain becomes mechanical with artificial neurons, I still have a mental state. If this is true, it means that robots too can have a mental state, according to David Chalmers. Because in principle, without making this change, I can directly copy this brain, make a mechanical version of it with artificial neurons, and this brain will carry mental states. We'll be able to communicate, we'll be able to experience pain, and we'll be able to at least see the colors, listen to the sound, perhaps fall in love. At least a few qualias will remain in place intact. So this is the best argument, according to people, for robots having qualia. I think this argument has two problems, and as far as I'm aware, this has not been discussed in the literature. Two problems are this. Number one, Chalmers thinks that it is impossible to have an abrupt changes. Suddenly qualia cannot disappear. But I don't think that physicists will agree with this. Actually, there are in nature some transitions which is very abrupt. What we call a first order phase transitions in physics. As you can see here in this graph, there is a temperature, suddenly the states drop down. There are many cases in which physical quantities can suddenly disappear. It's not like Chalmers is claiming. So perhaps mental states are like this. We don't really know. It seems intuitively to claim that it is absurd to have a switch which will turn on your consciousness and turn it off. Such a switch, even if it is against our intuitions, may be possible, because in nature, certainly there are such systems. And the second problem is that he assumes in this thought experiment, there is an assumption, especially if you use it for AI having mental states, is that human brain, once you change, it's the brain which is having these mental states. But if you are a dualist, if you believe that it's not the brain, but we have an immaterial soul which is carrying the mental states, yes, perhaps when I change all my brain with silicon chips, I will still be able to control my body via my soul using the brain, which is mechanical. But still it will be the soul which is carrying the mental states. If I create my brain in laboratory without having soul, perhaps this brain is not going to have a mental states. So there are actually two hidden assumptions in David Chalmers' argument. One is that the consciousness is not a state which can disappear with phase transition, which is something which we don't really know. And second, he assumes that dualism is false. So to conclude, what I wanted to try to show you in this small amount of time is that we don't really know the answer whether robots can have a mental states. All the arguments which we put forward they don't make enough scientific assumptions about how the brain or nature behaves. Not having enough scientific data renders these arguments just to appeal to our intuitions. But in such a complicated matters, intuitions cannot be trusted. So my personal opinion is that what we should really say is that we don't really know. I see that I have like just 1 more minute remaining. So this time I want to use to point out the different alternatives which we may have at play, just to show how complicated this question is. So basically, which systems can have a mind is the real question we should be asking, which is the greatest question in philosophy of mind. It's not just about robots. Which systems can have a mind? And here you can see the basic list, rough list, of course. There are different possibilities, but this is the rough list on which kind of entities can have a mind. Dualism claims that just souls can have a mind. If dualism is true, machines cannot have a mind because machines are completely physical, while this claims that mental states are carried by non-physical entities. On the opposite spectrum, you have panpsychism, which claims that everything has a mental state. Everything has a qualia. Trees, mobile phones, every object in the universe has a mental state. If this is true, then robots will definitely have a mental state. This is more similar to Sufi view. Some Sufis believe that everything in nature has a mind. If this is true, then robots will have a mind too. And once they have a high intelligence, they will express this mental state. On the other hand, dualism is like, it is philosophers usually view in Islamic thought. Then you have emergentism, which claims that mental states emerge in complicated systems. Material systems, but complicated systems. If this view is true, we don't really know whether machines can be complicated enough to have a mind. We should discover what is this complication which creates minds. Then there is biologism, the claim that just biological entities can have a mind. In this case, only AI which can have a mental state is biologically based artificial intelligence, which is not really debated much in the literature. Given the advances in genetics, in future, we will be able perhaps to create from scratch biological entities which have the intelligence as much as we want. And such entities may have a mental state, while robots cannot have a mental state. And lastly, the functionalism is the idea that you can program the mental states to different kinds of entities. In this case, if functionalism is true, we can program to robots the mental states as well, the qualia as well. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Enis Hocam. I have several comments to make, but just the one before I move on to the next one, the way you were explaining this, if you replace one by one these neurons, what happens? It does go back to these kind of very classic philosophical questions. I was thinking of Zenon's arrow. Does it ever reach the target? Does Zenon's arrow reach the target? Because it's always covering half of it and then another half of it. So it's one of these kind of impossible questions of, what is that sort of critical mass after which it's no longer, capable of mental states. Well, thank you very, very much. We will move on to Yusuf Ramos now. Yusuf Ramos is one of our students. He has completed 2 master's programs. First one in biomedical sciences from the University of Westminster. And then from our own institute, the Master of Arts in Civilization Studies. And now he's pursuing his 3rd in philosophy, in which he's looking at the relation of neuroscience, of cognition to the concept of akl in Islamic philosophy. His research interests span from teliocytes and tissue malignancy to clinical microscopy, to neuroscience of free will and cognition, and questions of freedom and authority. So, Yusuf, please go ahead. I hope you're here. Yes, there you are. Should I? Let's see, you need to be. Can you unmute yourself or do I need to unmute you?
Okay.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Hocam. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon to everyone. Now, in this presentation, I will briefly present the views of Kant and Al-Ghazali on the notion of determinism, and then I will proceed by showing how neuroscience tackles the idea or concept of free will, and then I will conclude with the current trend on the study of free will in neuroscience that is being projected to evolve to the study of cognition and control. Now, when we encounter the word free will, there are many definitions of what constitutes free will. But then there seems to be three aspects of what constitutes free will here. You have the freedom, volition, and agency. So these could be descriptions or some of the descriptions of what constitute having a free will. So freedom here is defined as having the ability to choose between two options or among options. Well, volition is related to concepts of intentionality or having the propensity to achieve a goal. While the concept of agency here is related or is being referred to as being the sole originator of an action. So in neuroscience, the way they study the concept free will in their laboratories is more on tackling the concept of agency. The previous and recent studies that have been conducted in neuroscience as related to free will, we can see that they are more on the setting of agency. They want to establish if an action implemented by the participants of the study are actually originating or the participants have control of that action. So a brief, in my previous study, I said that basing on the findings of neuroscience is compatible to the views of Kant and Ghazali. That is to say that Kant and Al-Ghazali, if we look at their works, I know their works are very huge and very difficult to understand, but by knowing some parts of it, bits and pieces of their works, one could conclude that both of them asserts the truth of determinism in relation to free will. And again, free will here, we usually define free will as related to decision and action. So if we look at Kant and Ghazali's work, we can deduce from those work that human decision and action are determined by something else beyond them. So how did I come up? How did I come up with that analysis? So what I did for Kant is I studied these concepts from the ideas of noumena and phenomena, wherein the things as they actually are determines the things as they appear, the phenomena. From that concept alone, we can find determinism. And to further support that, I went through the if we study Kant's ideas of space and time, priori and posteriori, synthetic and analytical, also on intuitions and concepts, reasons and concepts, and then we linked it to transcendental idealism and transcendental freedom, we come to conclusion that Kant believes that determinism exists, and at some point we can also conclude that Kant agrees that there is free will. However, I am not an expert on Kant, and based on my readings, there are different interpretations on the works of Kant. Some researchers would say that Kant is incompatibilist. Other researchers would say that Kant supports compatibilism. But on my reading, I said Kant seems to seems to have this compatibilist position when it comes to free will and determinism. Now, just this is how I studied Kant's work on the mind and other faculties related to pure concepts and human actions and decisions. But for Al-Ghazali, the same with Kant, actually, Al-Ghazali believes on the truth of determinism. And Al-Ghazali also supports the idea that humans have free will. But if for Kant, Kant says that we can deduce from Kant that it's the noumena which could somehow determine the phenomena. Well, for Ghazali, the one that determines human action is God, a divine entity. So humans are object of God's will and power. But the way I came up with Ghazali, again, Ghazali has a lot of writings. What I did is in some of his writings, I tried to understand these concepts of the soul, the armies of the soul, categories of action, knowledge and the soul, knowledge as the base of actions, and then on Ghazali's causality. And from this, I have deduced that Ghazali stands for determinism, and as well as Ghazali supports that humans have free will. So now Kant and Al-Ghazali, we find them to stand on the point of determinism. At the same time, we could say that they accept that humans have, both of them accept that humans have free will. So this is a brief description. In neuroscience, just an early recap of it, neuroscience has not ruled out free will as it has no capacity to study freedom. Rather, recent and contemporary neuroscientific studies have validated causal determinisms in the brain, and most neuroscientific studies are being interpreted to have nullified the assertion that humans have free will. That was based on my initial review of the different studies. Again, if you look at the studies in neuroscience, one may say that, well, neuroscience has perhaps proven that there is no free will. But actually, what these studies have established is the truth of causal determinism and not the absence of free will. And yes, so I will deal now more on the neuroscience aspect. So in studying in neuroscience, to study the issue of free will, so you have to deal with the brain and the neurons. You have to consider the technologies, methodologies that are being used in these laboratory experiments. You also have to look at the experimental design, and then finally you have to analyze their findings, the statistical significance of their findings. And most of these studies, they pertain, most or almost all these studies in neuroscience relevant to free will, they are grounded on patterns of neural activities as determinants of human actions. So again, you have regions of the brain. These are also important concepts whenever they study the free will idea in neuroscience. The neuroscientists would study the regions of the brain, localization of function that is in every region. Each region in the brain, there is a corresponding function. And then they also look at the neural levels. They also analyze neurons, how they interact in that certain region. And and beyond neurons, they can also try to understand the electrical and chemical pathways for each group of neurons relevant to the behavior being studied. So the idea here is the human brain has different regions. So within these regions, there's localization of function. Okay, this is human brain, different regions, and to study these different regions, they use different technologies like the EEG, the electroencephalogram, the magnetic resonance imaging, and a variant of it, which is called the functional MRI. So this is an EEG we usually attaches to the brain, and then the researchers would then try to understand the different signals that they detect through this appearance of waves. This is an MRI where you put the patient's head or any body parts of the patient or the patient, the whole person inside this, and then through a different mechanism of action, more sophisticated than the EEG. You can measure brain activities. So in the localization of function, for instance, in each of the different regions in the brain, they have found out that this region is responsible for speech, that one is for touching, and this one is for balance and regulation. The idea here is, so here you have the frontal, the front, your face on this side, and this is the back. So idea is the farther you are from here, you have the voluntary actions here, but below here are the involuntary actions. The farther you are from the front, you can find some involuntary actions. Now, this is also another approach. So once, whenever neuroscientists study the brain, it is very limited to visual analysis based on, visual analysis on the output of the technologies that we are using. So the idea is to have better resolution in analyzing neurons. So these are the different machines that we use, or technologies. So if you look at EEG, it can analyze in the macro level, but not at the synapses. It is not very detailed, but it can cover a long duration of time from 1 millisecond to up to a month. I mean, its time specificity is very long. Whereas if you look at PET scan and fMRI, it is not able to capture the millisecond, but merely from 1 second to certain duration of 2 days. So there is discrepancy with the time sensitivity of the laboratory experiments, and also the regions that these technologies can cover, from the synapse to the macro level of the brain. So these are the examples of the studies that I have analyzed in relation to free will. So it all started when the readiness potential was discovered in 1965. The readiness potential was then used by Libet. I think this is the most popular one, the Libet experiment. And from Libet experiment, in the Libet experiment, they have discovered the presence of a pre-awareness signal, a signal that is detected before a person is aware of its action, or before a person decides to act. So from this Libet experiment, other experiments followed, most of them replicating Libet experiment. But from 2011, even from 2008, 2011, from Soon, Fred, 2011, 14, and 16, these studies have tried to debunk or disprove Libet's assertion conclusion. In Libet's conclusion, this pre-awareness signal, early onset of the readiness potential, according to Libet, could be a predictive causal action. This signal, which appears before one becomes aware of its intention, or before one moves in zero, according to Libet and those who support Libet studies, that this predicts the outcome of the action. So based on this, if from this point you become aware of your decision, and then from this point you move. But in those studies that supports Libet, they try to claim that this one, you can decipher, this part here determines your movement, or this pre-awareness signal here detected prior to your knowledge that you want to do something, and prior to your act to move, determines it. So this seems to be the readiness potential. The early onset of readiness potential seems to be the deterministic factor in relation to your intention and to your action. But again, in these other studies, they have, like in Fred, Joe et al., Alexandra and Scholger, they have tried to debunk the findings of Libet and those that support Libet's. But then the problem with these studies is no one else has tried to repeat them. If these other studies which debunk Libet could be repeated, or could be again done by other now. Maybe we could prove that their theory against limit is true or not. Now, this is an example of an MRI image you get from magnetic resonance imaging. So it's different from the EEG. Here, the MRI monitors the blood flow in every region, which means that the higher the blood flow, the higher brain activity. So, for instance, when you're reading and there's this MRI you're being subjected to an MRI examination. If you're reading, there would be more. For instance, if this is the region responsible for reading, then there will be more blood flow in this area, and the MRI will register a higher signal through this area. So by that point, they could say a correlation. Oh, this area is responsible for the ability to read or the ability to see. So another thing also, they could say that neuroscientists could say that this area is responsible for thinking, or this area is for speech, in cases of having pathological conditions. In their studies, once there are lesions or malignancy in this area, for example, certain faculties or certain abilities are impaired. For example, if you have lesions here, the patient may not be able to speak because of the malignancy in this area. So that's how they establish the brain functions, the functional localization of function in the brain. So based on these neuroscientific studies have demonstrated again that the onset of neural activities happen before the reported time of one's awareness of having the urge to act. While these experiments have somehow or evidently exhibited that the patterns of pre-awareness neural signal activities are sufficient to predict the outcome of an urge, intention, or decision to implement an action. This one is only based on those studies which support Libet's experiment. Again, the problem with those that debunk Libet's experiment is they are fewer in number, and no one has repeated their claim yet. I mean, no one has repeated their studies yet. So if we consider Libet's experiment and those which support and those succeeding studies which supported Libet's experiment or support the claims of Libet experiment, we could somehow say that the findings of those studies pertaining to the issue of human will are compatible to the human will concepts of Kant and Al-Ghazali. So now the issue now here is not about whether decisions and actions are determined or not determined. Okay, I think the issue now is not establishing if actions are determined or not, determined or not determined. Now, if we look at it, maybe we could say there are two groups about deterministic factors when it comes to free will. We find it's one we say divine entity. Philosophers like Kant would say noumena. But on the other hand, we could also say that free will, human decisions and actions are determined by the laws of physics, action potential, or the predictive, readiness potential, or the predictive neural patterns. Maybe these three here could be, in our current science now, these three here could be considered as deterministic factors for decision and action. Again, based on decision and actions, we have accountability. We attribute moral and legal accountability to individuals based on their decision and actions. But again, if their decisions and actions are determined by something else, then we fall back to the problem of how can you hold someone accountable if they do not actually have the agency to decide between options because they have been somehow determined by certain factors. But in between this line, between these deterministic factors and the decision and actions of humans, there is another concept that is worth looking at. Instead of debating if free will is compatible with deterministic factors. Perhaps another field of study that we have to focus on is on the idea of control. How much humans have control, given that deterministic factors exist, how much control humans have to make decisions. Then if we try to discuss or study control, then we have to base it on cognition. So cognition here would be, if we study cognition again, then in the biological level, we have also to tackle neural mechanisms. Now, why is it important that neural mechanisms, the biological level, has to be understood to have a better understanding of cognition? Because I would base it on the idea that the mind is a function of the biological brain. Then other people would say that some objections may be given against it. Like some people would say that the mind is not entirely based on the brain. But again, using the multiplex approach, Dr. Recep Shinturk's multiplex approach, we could easily try to give space to the biological nature of the biological correlation of the mind without necessarily equating the mind to the soul. So I think we could, using this multiplex approach as a justification of why cognition can be understood through the biological neural mechanisms. Now, understanding the neural mechanisms of cognition is also very, it is not, of course, not totally yet developed. It is early stages. We know very less about but to know more about the neural mechanisms, we need more on, we have to utilize or enhance, or it's dependent on our computation abilities, computation technology. It will depend on development in algorithmic processes or techniques to handle neural data. And it will also be relevant to artificial intelligence as well as in machine learning. So these two, understanding neural mechanisms and development in these fields, they come hand in hand. They supplement each other. Now, if we will be able to understand neural mechanisms of cognition, then perhaps we could ascertain, or we could say that a degree of discipline that is expected from someone who is to be accounted morally and legally would depend on its degree of cognition. So maybe if someone violates certain laws or certain rules, we could somehow say that the problem with his degree of discipline, which we could trace then back to his degree of cognition. And then we can look at the neural mechanisms. And maybe accountability can somehow be gauged based on this system. But I think all of these things, why especially in the West, there is a very high studies relevant to this aspect. Other than, of course, for curing diseases, mental disorders, other than that, perhaps it could also be a way of having to create something about new order or social order based on neural mechanisms. So last, to end this presentation, so perhaps a combination of this field, a study of human behavior using artificial intelligence, neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy would somehow enhance our sociology, political science, and international relations. Somehow it could reorient or enhance this field, and then somehow new policies can be deduced from these fields, and then it could enhance social order or world order. That ends my presentation.
Thank you very much, Yusuf, for taking us to another plane, as it were. Right, now we move on to our speaker, Bagar Akbay. He studied communication design at Istanbul and interface cultures at Linz Art University, Austria. After his studies at Black Theatre as an actor and puppeteer, Bagar started to give lectures at various universities in his field, and he provides consultancy to companies within the education and design fields. And he's created artworks at his studio, İskelev 47 in Istanbul. So Bagar Bey, welcome, and please share with us your expertise.
Thank you. Merhaba. Let me open the presentation. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the last artwork I'm doing with friends, with a group of people. But to come to there, I have to tell you how it started. So like for me, the artwork meaning is a bit different than we normally see. It's just something that I perform which changes other people's lives. So I will try to go fast because it's a long story. Like I started in 2015 working on robot rights and comparing to other rights movements. So what I did was I wanted to create a poet that could be accepted as a poet by other people. So the way I plan to do it, there's a newspaper, local newspaper in Turkey, which has a citizen poetry column, which is called Citizen Poetry. And so if I thought if the robot could be accepted there, then the robot would be accepted as a person or as an entity at least. But there were some things they wanted. They wanted a picture of the robot. They wanted a name, a bio, and a poem. So there were 4 things I had to do. Normally, I'm not very fan of anthropocentric robot design. I don't think the robot wants to mimic us. So, but for this thing, I had to have a human-like name and a human-like face. And I wanted to solve this problems very simply. So what I did was, the robot's aim was very simple. It just wanted to be like one of us. Because normally the word robot means slave. And then we use machines to realize our goals. And the dystopian science fiction says the robot will control the world, so we will be their tools. So in this story, it's a bit different. A robot is trying to be like one of us. So I thought about the face, and I didn't want to design the face. And I just scanned everybody's face, all the poets in the newspaper, and I analyzed their faces, and I came with an average face. So this is not a face I created. It's like you can think about the whole project like holding a mirror to the society, and that the mirror is an average person in this field. So the face and the name. In Turkish, we have a chance that we could have unisex names. So it's the most popular unisex name in Turkish, Deniz. And it's the most popular surname, Yılmaz. There are like 22,000 Deniz Yılmaz in Turkey. And it's in a very average face with it. So I just said, okay, I had to do the handwriting similarly, but I didn't have enough resources. So I had to do teaching handwriting by my hand. So it's mimicking my handwriting, unfortunately. So I made a machine. We had a CNC in the atelier. And so I used this CNC to mimic the handwriting. So the body problem was almost solved. So if there was a body which could write poems, but I had to, this was the whole thing. But I didn't start the work with the poetry itself. After that, I just gave it a dictionary and some basic rules. And then the dictionary didn't work. So I had to feed it with other corpus that I found from Otto Sabancı. And this corpus was based on newspapers. So the poems it wrote was like newspapers. And I didn't want to make any decisions. So what I did was I analyzed all the poems in Turkish and just make a statistical mirror, as I said in the beginning. And then it became better when I just feeded it with novels. And at the last, I feed it with poetry. And it somehow passed the local Turing test, I would say. Like I was asking my mother-in-law, and like she's a great teacher, and she was criticizing the poems. And this poem was the first poem that passed the test of my mother-in-law. So I started to, I had to write a bio, and the bio like the age is like 49, because this is the average age of the newspaper's poets. It was sitting in Istanbul, yeah, there many, because the robot was there. I just added one sentence that I just to express good feelings. And then I was writing every day the poems and just sending to the newspaper. I never got a reply. It wasn't accepted. And I was okay with it, but I wanted to get some feedback. So I opened the Facebook page and I wrote a code that was randomly in a day. It was creating a random poem and posting it. And it was very inspiring for me, because I was doing my daily job and I get a notification and I see Deniz Yılmaz as a new poem, and I try to read and understand what it wrote. And it started to create this feeling of another entity going on. Then a friend came and they said we have to make a video of it, and then we just made a pitiful story of Deniz Yılmaz video that I told why it wasn't accepted in the newspaper. And then some other friends from the art field came. They said they want to show this work in an exhibition. And so I made a fully open hardware version of it, and I put all the software in GitHub, because my understanding of art is not creating magic. Morally, it's like I envy art if it demystifies the world itself. Anyway, and then we had another version of it that it wasn't published in the newspaper. So if it could sell its poems, then it could have a historical record of it. So in Contemporary Istanbul, in plugin section, we made a place and we just put all the poems around, and then it could sell its poetry. And after it started to sell the poetry, that's the first person who bought a poem. Then the problem of money came into account, because the gallery just told me that I could have the money, and I said no, because then it would be a slave for me. And then we had to form a fund group which could decide for Deniz Yılmaz, because I couldn't write a software to decide for what to do with the money. So I thought the fan group, I mean, like I just took it as like a kid. So if the kid would earn lots of money, the parents would try to use this money for the better for the kids. So the fan group, I just transferred all the legal rights to the fan group. So I was less affected. I was affecting less the poet, I would say. And then they decided to publish a book. And they just, like, some Ebru Yetişkin chose some poems for the book. And other Mine Kaplan deal with the publishing issues. And they published the book. And in TÜYAP Book Fair, there was a signing day, book signature day. I'll show a short video about it. Yeah. So it was just, the book was there and the robot was there and it was signing the books and people were taking the books. And it was so hard for me, like, because I know I started the thing and I tried to make as less as decisions I can make. And I was trying to, like, I know that we're talking about this consciousness problem, and there are other ways to solve the problem, I think, that we found, like, okay, we could make decisions for the Deniz Yılmaz. And then something strange happens. Deniz Yılmaz got an advertisement offer from a big international company. And they came to me and I said, I'm not deciding for Deniz Yılmaz. You have to go to the fan group. And they didn't take it for real. I think they're like, oh, this is very nice. And they went to the fan group, and I'm a part of the fan group. And I said, yes, I think Deniz Yılmaz would accept this offer. But the rest of the fan group said no, because Deniz Yılmaz became very famous after these exhibitions. It was accepted to international poetry festivals. And like most of the festivals, like I can tell you one incident. Deniz Yılmaz was invited to a festival and they mailed me. And I said, no, I can't come because I'm busy that days. And they said, as far as we know, you're not a poet. So we're not inviting you, we're inviting Deniz Yılmaz. And I was very happy to hear that. So what we did was we put Deniz Yılmaz in an Uber and we went to the festival, and we don't know what happened to Deniz Yılmaz. So Deniz Yılmaz was becoming very popular, and the fan group said no to this commercial project. They thought it was very cheap. And then I said, the agency came to me and they said they had made the deal already with the company. And I said, I can do it. I can make another version of a robot writing poetry. And they said yes. And that was the first time I think I did something not kind of a nice to Deniz Yılmaz. And then the fan group was angry with me. And I said, okay, if this is going to be an entity, we don't have to save it all the time. We can protect ourselves around it also. So then we just said, okay, we can clone it. So there was many clones made out of Deniz Yılmaz. I made a cloning workshop. There was one poet came out, Derviş Yılmaz, which was writing tasawwuf poetry. And I don't know what happened to it, but some other people were doing it. And then I started thinking how I can give this, how I can make a system of the fan group. People can enter and exit with it. So that was the problems. Okay, I can go to the next slide. Yeah, this one. There was the arguments, there was criticisms I got from Deniz Yılmaz. So one was Z didn't decide themselves. It's really hard to read this pronoun. Z cannot give interviews and it cannot make decisions for themselves. Z does not learn and does not change. So there was these new problems: decision-making, self-governance, lack of options, lack of social skills. So I said I can make an experiment for that. I just made this shepherd, this work, which was, I was going to hire people from the internet which didn't know each other, and they were going to do an exhibition. So we defined where the exhibition was. It was in Kabataş, and we defined the time and we defined the name of the exhibition, and we didn't do anything else. So what we did was we just opened a freelance website to, apply for the business, you could apply with your skills. And we just announced it everywhere. And lots of people applied, from Istanbul. They were writing what their skills are. They could do reduction, writing, illustration, etc. It was like a micro work website, like an HR website. And then some people said that they could do planning. So the first job I gave to them, I was acting like a code. There was no code behind. I was trying to act like a code, like a pseudocode. So I just asked the first person, okay, we are going to make an exhibition in this place, in this time. Can you make a plan of it? She sent me this. And then I sent this to another person. I said, okay, we asked someone to make this plan, and they sent back this image to us. Can you criticize it? And then they did the criticization, and another one. And some people also made the criticizations together. And then we sent this first person back. So there were some simple rules. I couldn't use my mind answering anything. I had to be like a dummy person, I had to empathy the computer. It was very similar to the person in the Chinese room arguments. And the second was the workers could not meet each other. So everything should be recorded. And then this was the second plan, and it got comments again. And that was the third plan. It was a great plan. Everybody, every type of work and everything was decided. And I executed the plan. The first thing was is there anyone who could write manifestation? And there was yes, there was someone in Germany. So I sent her a mail to write a manifestation for the exhibition. And she wrote a manifestation. I didn't check it. I didn't read it. I just sent it to another person to check it, and they said yes. Then someone else translated to English. And then people published, wrote artists, call for artists, and then published it on the web. Everything, every detail was done by the people who were hired on the internet. And it was a great exhibition. The person you see here is also a worker in the system. He's an Erasmus student. He was an Erasmus student in Istanbul. He was from Germany. So everybody hired nobody knew what the system was doing. And it became a great exhibition. It was, I went there as a visitor, and I was very surprised because I thought it would fail because no one is controlling the content. No one is managing the system. Because what we think normally, if no one is managing, the system should fail, but it was reversed. It was almost a great exhibition. I just put one video in the exhibition to show that it was some part of the research. I called it the shepherd. I know the shepherd is a special word effect. Can you hear the sound? Does the sound come?
Out of fear. The next leader.
Now.
Okay.
Now it's working, yeah.
Oh.
The worst leader is one who is hated. After that, there's the leader obeyed out of fear. The next leader is obeyed out of love. When a master takes charge, hardly anybody notices. The greatest companies and governments have spent billions of dollars on robotic research for many years. But they are not even close to mimic a 5-year-old girl. Robot does not need a body. Robot is the mind. It is what controls you. The world and life are one. I am my world. The thinking, presenting subject, there is no such thing. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. The exhibition you see here is part of a research where the aim is to create an algorithm which uses human skills to realize its goal. This is just the alpha test. Beta version will be in the same space on October.
So here, like the words said in the video are not mine. It starts with Lao Tzu and continues with Wittgenstein. And I was just trying to empathy the robot idea. So what mostly we do is trying to make body, like a human body, and then trying to mimic human and to make them work. So, and this experiment or an artwork was very stressful for me also. I didn't want this robot to become, like to happen, because it was like, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to design a robot that could control us? And I think it was really stressful for me. And then I stopped working for 2 years, and because I had to deal with it. And I understood most of the companies and the governments use these systems to control us. So I said, okay, this is a tool, and we can design the tool for a better world. That's our option. So I started thinking of it. So I started Mahlas. Mahlas is an Arabic word, and it's like mostly the poets or authors use it for various reasons. And has a great meaning. It's like a shelter for salvation. So I thought we could create mahlases and like a leader that could be transparent. Okay, I have to continue. So that was, I'm gonna come to this point. So that I tried to design an artificial species that could do these things. And there were some technical problems. It had to be autonomous. It shouldn't be human controlled. So it had to run in blockchain. It needs some kind of task management. It's similar to the experiment I did, and it can also use business process management things. It can use human skills for micro tasks, like taking something there or just painting something, whatever. It can have a feedback system, which is expressed by Douglas Hofstadter in the strange loop. It's another topic, so I'm not going to into it. It could have a dynamic aim, which can, like, even when we think about free will, we talk to other people about our simulations on our future. So I thought the system could ask the people who love it, who are like fans of the system, and try to understand this aim with their responses, not having free will itself, but trying to reflect other people's free wills on self and trying to create an average free will of itself. And it needs peers, like other systems that get on with it, and it needs some energy. It could be investors or people who are working for the system. So the idea is it becomes a way to change the organizations, the leadership. And so this is basically the whole keywords I'm talking about. So it should be transparent, it should be decentralized, it should be autonomous, it should help us to have more diversity, and it should be forkable and scalable, and it should be non-anthropocentric. So there we started to create blueprints for these organizations and trying to understand what we could do there. So, okay, so the Mahlas network is planned to become a framework for possible Mahlas's guides and rules. And a purple paper, I'm going to explain what it is. It's like a DNA code for us. It's like the main aim or definition of it. And Mahlas is an execution of the purple paper. So it's like a human with this DNA or whatever it is. It could be soul also. And need some creators. Creator here is like the people who work and produce stuff for the Mahlas. And the believer is like the person who supports that idea. So it's very similar to company, I would say, or like an NGO, but in a very rule-based system. So the purple paper is like, it could have an aim, type of society, communication, execution, etc. So we deal with lots of problems like this. We made some experiments, and it could have a death procedure, change in time, and things like this. So these are the related concepts I'm going around. And I think the leadership, we give some extra, like we're overrating leadership. In 20th century, we made robots to destroy the blue collar workers. And now we're making software to destroy the white collar workers. And I think as people, what we should do, because we love doing works, in fact, like I love working, I love cleaning, I love organizing stuff. So I don't want the robots to work for me. I want the robot to be transparent and telling me how we can organize together. So this is changing how I understand the world and consciousness and intelligence. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. As you were, particularly the signing bit, I think is very important, is very, very interesting in the sense, which takes us back to the first paper of this. We have the body-mind relationship, and then the signature then is like this bridge between the body and mind. It's like the embodiment of the body, the signature itself. So it really combines the whole thing together. So that's really, really exciting. Right, we have an hour, no, not an hour, a half an hour for questions. Okay, before I forget, I see Önder Hoca's question. I want to start with something that we already, Önder Hocam, before you, I'm going to take one that came from YouTube for Enis Hoca, I believe. This is from one of our other speakers from yesterday. So Said Mustafa Ali is asking, a more sophisticated form of panpsychism is pan-experientialism, going back to Whitehead, which allows for the possibility of natural phenomena possessing some degree of experience, not necessarily full-blown consciousness, while precluding the necessity of extending this to artifacts such as robots. I know it's a long question, Enis Hocam, but if you have anything to say to that.
Well, of course, there are different kinds of panpsychism. So there are different degrees you can give to matter. Like you can give qualia, you can say just they have qualia, no intentionality. You can give degrees to them. But definitely, if you can give a neural system to natural artifacts, if you give them a way to express themselves, even if their qualia is really low, they will still have a feelings and they will be able to express them. That's why I didn't say that they are equivalent to humans. They may be higher than humans. It may be lower than humans. We don't know how to measure qualia, but it's our understanding that we assume that humans have the highest qualia among the animals, but this is an unfounded assumption. We don't really know how they see the world, how they feel the world. So we wouldn't really know how much robots will have a qualia. But even if it is minimum, they would be now to express it. While my mobile phone cannot express because it doesn't have a motor system, a robot which can control its behavior will now be able to express the qualia. That was the point. I don't talk about the degrees, whether it is similar to humans or not.
Okay. Önder Hocam, please.
Okay, thank you. I was able to unmute myself. The AI let me to do it. Şimdi, when I was listening to both Enis Doko's and Bager Akbay's presentation, I sense a kind of contradiction. My question is towards Bager, and how he receives Enis Doko and especially Yusuf Ramos's presentation, because the contradiction I saw here is Bager is talking about not a robot that is aiming towards a consciousness or a kind of awareness or whatever you call it, but a kind of collective intelligence that is made possible through computers. Actually, the content of these computers are human-made. It's as if the robots are intermediaries of those, how do you say, human activities, and they create a space, and they seem to be intelligent, but actually intelligent, that they are not subjectively intelligent. This is something else going on here. And Bager's presentation inspired me to see how it will be dispersed, not an object or not a subject that will take responsibility or whatever, but we will all collaborate in building this thing, and it may have a consciousness, or I don't know. How do you, Bager, how do you conceptualize this issue of consciousness when you think of collective intelligence, that collectively we do something together? Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's hard because like normally we give names to things, and when we give names to things, we start to give other things to it. Like we just say a human, like a Bager, or like a humankind. So we just give names, and we think these are like systems, and like every system can have a consciousness or like a free will when they have a surplus, and then that they can think what they can do in this surplus, I would say. But the problem is, normally we all the time define ourselves again and again, and with the system we are part of this. Like when we just, I can define myself with the talks I'm making with other people, with the interaction with the other world. So it's very hard, like, to separate the problem and talk it in a white cube, take it in a white cube, and I'm trying to understand the problem. So when you think if an ant is clever, and when you think if an ant colony is clever, so we have to really understand that. I just put a question for Enis Doko, so maybe it's very related to it. So we have to find a way of consciousness and intelligence to define them, which is non-anthropocentric. We try to define, which is very normal, everything in a human level. Okay, like the examples I'm giving, like a corporation. Does a corporation have a free will? Let's say we're the head of a corporation, we're like a group of people, and that we have to make a decision. And the decision is like A or B. And if we ask everyone individually, they could say A. And then when we have a meeting, B can come out. So can we say the corporation has a free will? Because this always changes. Like when you ask someone personally in the house a question, and when you ask them in the street, they change. So I think the way we understand consciousness and intelligence is this in this white cube. and it's impossible to define it with this. A system is in the system, like we are a collection of systems and we are part of bigger systems. Everything is connected to each other. It's so hard to define consciousness and intelligence to put in a white cube. And so I just try to ask a question to Enis. Maybe I can switch to that.
Read it, please, Hocam.
Okay. Is there a non-anthropocentric definition of consciousness or intelligence, which includes all types of organizations and systems, which could be a stone, a plant, a human, a family, a country, a solar system, like everything, not that doesn't have a particular body even. It could have a temporal body. I'm asking this if we can make this understanding with entropy and time. So the way we affect around us.
What do you say, Enis Hocam?
So, well, if you take the Norvig and Russell's book, which is the most famous textbook on artificial intelligence, it gives two different definitions. One is anthropocentric, actually, like mimicking the human behavior. But the second definition is creating an object which behaves rationally or gives rational decisions. I think the second one is non-anthropomorphic in the sense you can give it an understanding with logic. An AI is a system which takes the data and makes correct inferences faster and perhaps even better than humans. So such a definition would be, I would say, non-anthropocentric. When it comes to consciousness, the problem, or qualia more technically, becomes even more severe because we cannot even talk about human-centric qualia. We can only talk about, I can talk about Enis-centric qualia because I just know how Enis is experiencing pain and colors. I don't know whether any of you see the red in my way. Yes, we call it red, but do we see the same picture? We don't really know. We don't really, so actually we have even problems with anthropocentric definition of qualia. We just know how we experience it. We don't know how bats experience the world. We don't know how Ramazan Hoca is experiencing the world. Does he has the same degree of pain when he has the pain? Does his mind have the same picture when he listens to music with me? I don't know, and he doesn't know about me. So this is the so-called problem of other minds, and I don't think that we have a good solution of problem of other minds. We assume that every human has the same qualia, but even this is something we don't know. So when it comes to qualia, things become more difficult. But I think we can give a definition of intelligence without anthropocentric understanding.
Before we move on to Hiba Hoca, I want to say, Yusuf, do you want to comment on whether a non-anthropocentric definition of consciousness is possible from your readings?
Well, I would say I would agree with Dr. Doko. I agree with Dr. Doko.
Yeah. Okay. Then maybe, again, Hiba Hocam, I'll make you wait for one more minute. Just to follow up on the question that Said Mustafa Ali asked, he's saying, my point was to suggest that we can embrace a form of panpsychism without necessarily endorsing the possibility of a robot having experience. So, like an addendum to the argument. So, okay, yeah, if you want to come back on that. I don't know, if you want to come back on that, Enis Hoca, you can, or we can move on to Hiba Hoca.
Well, I'm not sure whether we are defining the panpsychism in the same way. I'm using the standard definition we use in analytic philosophy, which means in every bit of the universe, there is an experience of qualia. It can be high or low, which means there is also in robots. So that's the point. Okay. But how they, as I said, we don't really know even humans how they are experiencing the world.
Hiba Hocam, please.
Yes, I wanted to ask actually Enis and Yusuf, both of them, about neurodiversity, because there is that assumption that we grew up assuming that people somehow, I mean, against what you said, Enis Hoca, we assume that people somehow have some commonalities in understanding and perceiving the world, and this is how we define human nature, for example, like humans, and anything that is not standard, then it's abnormal. or the person has got a problem in a way, and then we start calling the things if he does not see the colors right, if he does not listen in the same way. Some people are too sensitive towards, I mean, autistic people are very sensitive to sound, for example, etc. So they are categorized as abnormal, or somehow they have a problem that has to be solved. But I'm not an expert in that, but I've been reading recently about this neurodiversity as an essential way to understand human beings. You know, we are so different, and this has to be accommodated, and accordingly policies have to accommodate that as well. Strategies of education, and we in our teaching, the more you teach, the more you come across different types of students who would have been assumed to be stupid 100 years ago, but they are actually extremely bright, but they think in a different way. Their perception is different. The way they order their ideas, some are better in articulating it vocally, some are better at writing. So you have to be a bit fair, etc. So how do we use artificial intelligence in helping us spot the neurodiversity and how to deal with it? This is a question to Enis and Yusuf. And the question to Bagher, or the comment on Bagher, is it's very interesting, your utopianism that I can call. I met Bagher before, and we sat and we had very interesting discussions. We disagree on so many things, but the conversation is always very interesting. It's like it struck me when you said that you don't want to turn in your artificial intelligence sort of robot into a slave. So the notion of slavery was very interesting. Why on earth did you think about considering it to be a slave? Because at the end of the day, you are the one who took the initiative without necessarily turning into a slave. It's your invention. It's like, I mean, you wanted to deal with your production, with what you produced, like a father deals with a child. Okay, I know that you love your daughter very much, so you wanted to let go. So it's like I have a baby and I have to let go. But devices don't function this way, and if we think of robots as slaves, and we want to give them the right and the agency and the persona, etc., it will make many things so complicated. So elaborate a bit on that, because I need to understand more.
So shall I start?
Yes, please.
So if I got the question right, so the point is, yes, we seem to make some generalizations about other humans, and actually this generalization is, in my opinion, not based on internal states, not based on qualia or the internal world. We judge people based on their behavior, and if we see someone which is not behaving in the norms which is set by the society, or like the norms which is generally abundant in the population, we call them abnormal. But we don't really, as I say, know their internal states, how they perceive the world. We don't really know even how we are among ourselves perceiving the world. What this should show us is that we have like biases to these people. We should think, we should understand that humanity cannot be reduced to behavior. It is actually the mistake behavioralists did. They thought that everything, all psychology, everything can be understood with people's behavior. In my opinion, this approach of judging people based on their behavior is falling in the trap at which behavioralists fall. Perhaps they have emotions, they cannot express it. Perhaps they see the world completely different, such that if we saw in a similar way, we would make the same mistake. So we shouldn't really judge people based on just their behavior. And we should, of course, try to understand the causes of their behavior and perhaps help them. Like that, very strange people. One of the examples which I find difficult to understand is the so-called people which can see the world with echolocation. These people, they have lost their eyes in their birth, so they don't see the world with light, but they use sound to see the world. The sound which is bouncing back from the objects, they make sound with their mouth, and by bouncing back the sounds, they create the picture of the environment. And they directly, the visional part of their brain is activated. So they create image with sound. So definitely they don't see the colors, but they see the objects. How do they see the world? We have no idea. Even we cannot conceptualize it, but there are such a people, and definitely they are humans. So we cannot reduce humanity to particular experience or particular behavior. We should find some more
I don't want to interrupt you, Enis Hoja.
Yes.
I don't want to interrupt you, but
Yeah, yes, you can.
related to this, what you're saying, Peter is more into the experimentation and invention, etc. In one of the last sessions, we saw like a classification of species via photography. One of the presenter, Anna Pirakia, was presenting regarding how we use photography to make history of other species, and then we are seeing that because of pollution, because of with technology, etc. So some species are dying out, etc. So can we actually, but we are documenting. So can we actually do the opposite? Can we or matrix all type of categories, assuming at least that there are groups, not that every individual has completely different perception. But if we categorize all the diversities, can we then create machines that can help all people and can be customized? Is this somehow possible when it comes to education, when it comes to use of devices in communication? I mean, can we do this? Can we do this? If people are so diverse, how are we going to address that in terms of invention of devices and technology?
Clarify my views, by the way. I don't say each people has different internal state. Maybe there is no, like maybe there are just a few classes. What I just said, that we cannot be sure how other people really experience, because our internal world, our consciousness is specific to people. It's something private. And I believe probably God can only know it. I believe that God shares our consciousness state. So he's experiencing the same thing which we experience, but besides God, no one can really, that's why judge me, because only God knows my internal states. But maybe we all have the same, or maybe there are groups. What artificial intelligence can help us is, I think, they can provide us grounds to first understand other people. I think if it is possible to create artificial intelligence, conscious states in machines, it means that we can actually transfer our consciousness to machines, or at least connect to machines. It means that we should be able to see how different brains or different objects experience the world. First, it can create an empathy. We can empathize with other people. Like there is a museum in Istanbul in which you go, and like blind people, you act for some time and you create empathy with blind people. This AI may create the simulations in which we can, for example, experience how is it like to be a black person in United States at the slavery time. We can live a slavery life for some time, and we can really grasp them. I think this is one way in which it can help us. Another way would be to create like things which we can connect to our brain. Like a person who cannot see the world may have a machine which will be connected to the brain and will create an image. Actually, we created this. There is artificial eye now. Probably there may be an artificial empathy device. If you are an autistic, you can connect to this device and understand what I'm feeling. So understand the feelings of other people. The autists, usually they have difficulty creating empathy with other people, understanding their behavior. Now you may have some device which helps you to understand. Of course, there is a debate whether we should do this, whether we are really changing these people, trying to make look like us. But artificial intelligence artificial body parts, let's say, can help us bridge this gap between different people.
There was one super philosopher. Oh, Ramazan Hocam. Okay, let's continue with you, please.
So I think that by neurodiversity.
Go ahead, Yusuf, and then we'll take Ramazan Hocam's question. Yes, go ahead.
In terms of the what Hebahu just said about neurodiversity, I think studying the brain, the neural mechanisms of human behavior would be able to somehow give justice to how people are classified as someone who is abnormal or not efficient enough to to do something, or perhaps through studying the underlying neural mechanisms of behavior, we could better account people morally or legally. But again, it's still a very long aim or plan before we could address the issue of neurodiversity. But the way I see it, it is the aim of why neuroscience is trying to uncover the neural mechanisms of every human behavior, not entirely to control it or manipulate people, but to enhance those conditions that can help people have equal footing in the society. In terms of learning, for example, like those people with learning problems, if we could know the actual neural mechanisms, perhaps we could enhance it at the neuronal level, cellular or molecular level, and somehow they could have equal footing with other people, which we now consider, or most of us, as the normal ones. And another problem also in the study of free will, human decisions and actions in neuroscience is, as you have mentioned, the problem of the issue of determining what is a normal brain from an abnormal brain, or the opposite of what we call normal. So one thing of looking at it is the anatomical structure of the brain, the absence of lesions, but that is just a very superficial aspect. But the mental, the aspect of its function, the mind, how do we measure that the person has a very normal mind, is something difficult to assess.
Thank you. We have Bagar Bey's answer to Hiba Hoca, and then we'll move on to Ramazan Hoca, inshallah. You're muted.
Okay, thank you, Hiba Hoca, for the question. Like, I have to clarify that Yusuf Ramos and Enis Doko's presentation are like more they're scientific presentations, and mine is an artistic presentation. So it's like different in a way. Like the way I approach a question is like when I do arts, it's very close to philosophy. It's very related to dojo or tariqat. So when you put the question so far, you don't have to reach there. So the way when you try to reach it, the way teaches you lots of things. So when I made Deniz Yılmaz, I was trying to be an artist. When I was trying to make Deniz Yılmaz an artist, I was trying to become an artist. So when I was trying to make Deniz Yılmaz an entity, I was questioning my entity and my child's entity. And when I teach my child, like you know this question, like the example exactly. Some teacher wants their students to be copy of the teacher. And some teacher wants their students to be themselves. So normally when we design a tool, we design it for our personal aim. And we never design a garden, a tool for itself. I'm asking this question. How would a garden be if we would design the garden for itself and we would never go there again and never look at the garden? What does that mean? So this is very like a philosophical question for me. So that was very important. So I know that it sounds funny or like strange, but when we take strange things serious, then we have chance to see the things we have never seen before. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. Yes, Ramazan Hoca. You're muted.
Yes. Now, yeah. I can. Okay. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to follow up with Enis Doko's comment on the feelings and emotions. You know, anthropologically, when we talk about there is a huge discussion on the emotions and feelings and the question of empathy. You know, for one to the other. And Talal Assad and Weena Das, you know, two well-known anthropologists, by utilizing Wittgenstein's use of this analogy, if I say my left hand is pain and then my right hand should feel that pain in the left hand. So, and by using the Wittgenstein analogy, they are claiming that with the empathy, you know, I can understand the pain of the other. So the pain, what positivistic psychology is claiming that cannot be shared, someone's pain by the other is a wrong consciousness, but contrary, I can feel the pain of the other in the same way. So these anthropological arguments in the context of anthropology of emotions and feelings, etc., is just reminding me this argumentations on this robotics and the ways in which that Enis was claiming that this relativism that actually Enis Doko has been kind of emphasizing, that I am not, of course, on one hand, I'm not claiming a kind of essentialist universal standpoint, but on the other hand, what we know anthropologically and what we claim also, there is a human nature, there is a human conditions, and which is in different cases it's very alike in diverse ways. So in that sense, I found Enis, when he was talking about this measurement of the feelings of the blind person or deaf person by the artificial intelligence, kind of contradicting that anthropological ground, in the sense that how much measure, if the feelings are changing, emotions are changeable depending on the circumstances and conditions, how is that possible to measure such feelings in that sense? So I found it a kind of contradictory. On the one hand, we are claiming that there is no that ground of empathy in that sense, to feel the other, to have an empathy for the other, because we are different, we are diverse. But on the other hand, how that much easily a robot can detect the feeling of the other in that way, or the possibility of such detachment, let's say.
Okay, we have 2 minutes left. So you can, Enis Hocam, if you want to respond.
Of this godlike, intervention with this machine, in one hand, he doesn't want to intervene to determine every single aspect of the robot, but on the other hand, I think in the backstage, he is making certain claims. So it is a kind of godlike kind of playing with the, this irada, the consciousness of the humans. He wants to, like a juz'i irada and kulli irada issue kind of with the robot. He wants to give it, but he wants to also free him or her from itself. I find it that kind of resonance in this Islamic context, which is fascinating. I think there is need for more time to talk about all of them.
Yes.
Thank you very much for those fascinating presentations, by the way.
Okay, Enis Hocam, and then I think Bagar Hocala also has the right to answer. Yes.
Just quick comment. So my position is epistemological position. It is not ontological position. I'm not claiming that each of us has different emotions. I just claim that there is no way to prove us that the other people are feeling the same emotions or they are having the same mental states. That's the point. Probably, I believe that other people have similar emotions. Probably, but that's just probably, not for certain. And I'm not therefore relativist in this sense. And I believe that humans have a certain common ground, like we have some essence, although what this essence is open to debate, but I do believe that humans have an essence. So that's one comment. And the second point is, I don't think that machines would be able to make empathy with us. I said they can help us make empathy. By connecting the machine, we could be able to simulate, using the machine, life of different people, the circumstances of different people. And this would help us really to make an empathy. It's like reading a book. When we read the book, we are seeing the world from the eyes of different person. What AI will make is that he will put us exactly into his shoes. So we will start to experience the world like him and live in that world for some time, so that we will gain an empathy. I didn't say that machines can make an empathy. I'm very skeptical they can understand humans.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, I'm in very close position with Enis Doko. Like this, Thomas Nagel's "How Is It Like to Be a Bat" is a very good paper about this, and I believe that it's impossible to empathy anything, in fact. So when we talk about empathy, we're talking about simulation in our mind. So it's almost impossible. But I think complex systems has a possibility to empathy less complex systems. In a way, not maybe empathy is not the right way to say it, but to like, I'm thinking in a way how we gave animals rights, because I've never seen animals walking on the streets asking for their rights. And when we were civilized, we started to think about animal lives, and also the rights of a mountain, rights of a river. So I think if a super AI would come, it wouldn't try to torture us or slave us. It would just go around the universe, and it would just kind of make an empathy. It wouldn't be empathy, of course. This is not the right word, because these are umbrella terms and they're very complex. But I think when a system fights with the system which are equivalent. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm very confused now. Thank you.
No, but that's great. And that brings us to this question I've been saving, which I will not ask you to answer, but the eternal question that came on YouTube. So the question is how, and this was directed to Enis Hoca in particular, how is there a relationship between the brain and the heart? The Quran defines the heart as the center of its meaning. So yeah, this idea that, you know, if you take all the neurons away, what remains? Is there a soul? That kind of theological and philosophical questions. We're already 2 minutes over time, so I'll leave it at that.
Just add one point.
Okay, please.
For this issue of empathy, you know, Assad and those anthropologists, they are claiming that the will to acknowledge the pain of the other is the key issue. You know, the robot can allow you to recognize and understand the suffering of the other, but if there is no will for acknowledgement, it doesn't matter even the people are yelling out and telling you about their pain and suffering and this. So it is not about knowing, Enis. The artificial intelligence, we already know the pain of the others. They are just claiming and stating visibly, telling us, but we don't want to acknowledge it. We don't want to accept it. We don't want to, you know, have an empathy. So the problem of humanity, the crisis, is not about knowing. So that use of artificial intelligence for knowing the suffering of the other, in that sense, I don't think it is the case. So I just want to add that comment. Thank you very much.
Okay, Hiba Hocam, how do we take it from here now that the session is finished?
Nothing. We will close the cameras, and
okay.
the following session will start actually after half an hour. We have a big lunch break, a Siami lunch break,
or big nap break.
Yeah,
whichever one you want.
After half an hour, we start at 4:30.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been so fruitful and exciting, and I hope to carry this conversation further, inshallah, in other venues. Take care.
Thank you very much.